We might be live. Yes, we are. I actually started streaming live to YouTube as well, but I don't look over there ever.
Does it just happen?
Yeah, and it makes it easier for me, so I don't have to like download it and then upload it. That way, it's already there.
Can people still comment on things over there?
Yes.
But you don't see it.
I only have like 500 subscribers or something. I don't know. I don't think anybody comments over there, but I haven't. I don't know. Actually, I haven't checked.
So there could be like millions of people commenting over there, and you just haven't noticed.
It's possible. It is possible. Actually, I might check. Hi. Hello, Facebook user. If you want your comment to show up, since this is a private group, there's some weird thing about privacy or names, but you can click on the post. There's a link in the post to give StreamYard permission to show your name. So you can click on that, and you too. Hi. Welcome. We're just waiting for people to kind of tune in so we can get started. So before we start, I can just introduce myself in the book club. And my house is very lively today, so we might have visitors. It always happens, but it is what it is. We'll just say hi and tell them to be on their way. So hello, my name is Megan Ashburn, and I am your fearless leader of, oh, hi, Bobby, That Awesome Book Club. Awesome. And the book club is, I don't even know how to describe the book club because it's forever changing. We started the book club like 5 years ago or 4 years ago, and it was to help me get through Neurotribes. And that's a thick book, so I just needed some help. I went on my page and said, hey, anybody want to read this with me? I'm going to start a group. And by the time we started the book, there was 600 members already. So yeah, that was a lot. So I was like, okay, sit up straight, Megan. Be professional. This is a thing now, I guess. So by the time we were done with Neurotribes, we had over 1,000 people. We started reading another book, and then we read another book. And then after a while, it seems like there are a lot of ADHD people in the group, and people stopped reading the books. So we pivoted, right? People kept joining, and so we pivoted. So we asked the authors of the books that we have read to come and join us, and they said yes. For some reason, people just say yes when you ask sometimes. So we started with, I want to say that Barry Prisant was our first guest. We had Steve Silverman on. We have so many things. Oh, hey, y'all. We have Caroline. Thank you for that amazing post today, by the way, Caroline.
Lovely, yeah.
I know, right?
Mm-hmm.
Her executive was functioning. Hey, Cass. Yay. Awesome. Hi. If you want your name to show up, you just have to click on the link above the post. So we are here with Kieran Rose. I hope that I did the book club justice. Now we talk about books, we make book lists, we do all of the things, and we talk to people like Kieran. Kieran has been on in the book club and my other groups like 1,000 times. Mm-hmm. So I'm always happy to talk to Kieran, one of my favorite humans. Kieran, please introduce yourself.
Before I do, I just want to say I've been a part of the book club right from the very beginning as well, and it's been so lovely seeing it grow and evolve and seeing so many people interacting in there. And what I really like as well is that even books that I might deem problematic are still discussed and talked about in a very kind of nuanced way, and it's not that kind of, you know, like, this is awful, keep it away from me kind of thing, because there's stuff that we can always cherry pick from anything. It's really nice that nuanced discussion is really there. It's just so, thank you for curating it, Megan.
Thank you. And I love the book club because there are so many, it's like a hodgepodge of people. There are autistic advocates, there are autistic people who are just starting their journeys and starting to advocate. And then there's like brand new parents that have just heard the word autism for the first time and We even have BCBAs in here. We have a lot of doctors in the group. We have, I mean, it's just everybody, therapists, teachers, administrators. We love it. Love it. Hello, I'm just trying to say hi to everyone. Stacy is in the house. Hi, Stacy.
Hey, Stacey.
Hopefully I can look at all the comments. If I'm missing somebody's comment, somebody tell me because it doesn't show me all the time. Okay, Kieran, who are you?
I'm me. That's enough. Let's move on. I hate this bit. I forgot that you asked this bit. So I'm Kieran Rose. I'm not your fearless leader because that's Megan. I'm pointing in the wrong direction. I am a person who does lots of things, which include things like research and writing and training and teaching and consultancy, and I do pretty much everything really. Try to do it well. I'm an autistic person, and yeah, that's me really.
An autistic parent.
Yes, and a parent as well. I always forget my children when I kind of talk about them. Not deliberately. It's not like I'm trying to forget them. It just
Break
goes up.
time. And also you have a fabulous course that is ongoing called Insights into Autism. Isn't that right?
Inside of autism, yeah.
The Inside of Autism. It is fabulous, and I have taken it, and I am still a member actually. Mm-hmm. And if you are looking for information on autism, no matter like who you are, like you could be somebody that is well seasoned in the topic, or you can be completely brand new. Kieran is one of the best teachers I've ever had, and he really breaks it down from like the very beginning. I think my most popular YouTube video is the video when I asked you, well, what is autism? And then you just broke it down, like stripping away all of the co-occurring conditions. And then in your course, you kind of build up on those co-occurring conditions. So yeah, Caroline said, yep, Caroline, Stacy, Cass all agree. Bobby, yes. It's an amazing course. So I highly recommend that.
Thank you.
So your new book, hold it up for us. This is what we're here to talk about. In the very beginning today, of course, we're going to talk about all of the things called Autistic Masking. And give us the Cliff's Notes version of Autistic Masking. What is it?
What is it? It is a book which I'm not the only one who wrote it. I have a co-author, Dr. Amy Pearson, who's a clinical psychologist. And we wrote this book as a bit of a touchstone, a bit of a way of kind of saying there's this whole narrative of masking out there, and actually we really need to think about what it's saying and what it means and where we go from here, because I find that narrative deeply problematic, and so does Amy. That's why we wrote the book. So it was a bit of a kind of a, let's just plant a flag in the sand and say, whoa, everybody, let's just stop and let's think about what everybody's saying so far, but where maybe we should be going with this as well. And it's masking, like many of the narratives around autism, is deeply pathologizing and dehumanizing, quite victim blaming. So there's lots of problems with it. So we just wanted to kind of address everything with it.
And Bobby said there are parts of it that are challenging, but good to know our autistic history is vital.
Yeah,
for sure.
That's the thing that we did at the beginning was we've got a chapter at the beginning called Setting the Scene, which from my perspective, which you'll know, Megan, understanding the history of autism is really important. It's really important to break down and kind of deconstruct why we think the way that we do about autistic people, why these narratives persist, where these ideas have come from. And so what we wanted to do, we didn't want to we could have rewritten Neurotribes. We didn't want to rewrite Neurotribes, but what we've tried to do is build on what Steve put into Neurotribes, because that book was published over a decade ago now. So it's quite old. So there's a lot that's happened in the last 10 years. There's a lot of new understandings and changes and things, and that have helped us understand the history a little bit better as well. So actually it was really important to us to kind of have that initial chapter where we do build on what Steve wrote about and incorporate new things which weren't available to us when Steve wrote them.
Right.
You know, when he did his research, new stuff that's been added and stuff. So just to kind of add more weight to neurotribes, which although it's old, is not outdated at all. It's just it stopped and we've carried on. So it's kind of
Yeah.
filling that
I think that was the reason I wanted to start the book club, was how did we get here? You know, me just beginning to learn and choosing which path to go down when I started learning. That was hard to decide. Like, nothing that I was getting it felt right. Nothing felt right until I read that article that you wrote. Do you remember that article a long time ago about I think it was about regression, or how we're framing regression and things like that. So it is so important to like learn the history so that you can actually make a educated decision.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's the history is awful. It's really disgusting. It's
It
absolutely
is.
horrible and vile, and there are a very small group of, obviously lots of people have been involved with it, but the kind of the headline acts, the very small group of people, predominantly men, a couple of women, all white people, you know, all with very problematic Jews, all with very problematic views based in eugenics, and you know, there's so much of a disgusting pathologizing narrative around it, and because it's been predominantly white middle class people, that's also been the narrative of autism has been very white and middle class as well, and it's so that within itself is deeply problematic, and that's something that we wanted to have as the kind of the backbone of the book. This thread, intersectionality is thread all the way through the book,
I love that.
because that's not thread all the way through the autism narrative, but it should be, because it's the heart of human experience. Intersectionality is so key to this, understanding unique individual differences and what that might mean for different groups of people and who's affected in different ways by different things, and that's at the key to all of this, and that's not in any of the narratives around autism, but particularly not the narrative in masking.
It's so true. I have to go to some of these comments so you can see them. Stacy says, love this new book. Just need more people in my world that want to discuss it. Therefore, I am so glad to be here from Mexico. Oh my gosh, I know you're loving that, Stacy. Cass has the book, read about half already. You know, Kieran is known for his long books. The article I read was probably like 5,000 words. I remember when you were writing the book and I was like, well, how many words do you have yet? And you were like, well, I already have over 100,000. I'm just going to have to trim this thing down.
And it ended up being bigger than that.
Yeah. Oh, I love that, Bobby. But you can jump all over the book and read different chapters. Yeah. Yes.
And that's what I was going to say. The length the length of the book is quite challenging. It's not quite Neurotribes. It's not quite that long.
But it's pretty long. Yeah, it is pretty long.
There was a point where we were debating whether we should just like go 2 or 3 words over the Neurotribes word length, just because we could. But no, we didn't. That would have been backbreaking. But like Bobby says, it's kind of, you can jump around, and that's the key thing. There is a narrative arc in it. It is like a book that you can read from cover to cover, but I wouldn't recommend sitting doing that in one sitting. It's a book that's meant to be studied, that you can dip in and dip out of.
You can dip in and dip out. Yeah, I love that. And Cass, oh, is there an audiobook coming?
There is an audiobook coming. But that, as you well know with yours, that requires spending time sitting down and actually doing it properly. And at the minute, Amy and I are so busy and unable to even meet for let alone a couple of hours, let alone to sit down and record an entire book. So it is coming, and we've got we've got an eye on an audio recording studio, and we've got people helping us, but it's just going to be it's going to take its time, but it will come.
Nice. Yeah, the audiobook is, because I guess you're going to be doing it yourself, but you got published with a more academic publisher,
and they have never done an audiobook before, so it's never been.
So you're going to have to figure that out yourself.
We're literally the ones that are doing all the experimentation for them.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure they're having a great time with your book. Never have sold that many in their lives before, in the history of the company before. Oh, yes, for sure. The audiobook is definitely needed. Okay, so in your book, what types of narratives are problematic that you see? Give us a couple, just like two examples of the problems that you saw with the narrative around autistic masking. I mean, aside from it being all about white people, middle class people, aside from that.
So one is around gender. First of all, the way that there's been a kind of in about 2015 when academics first started talking about or looking at masking as if they'd made this new discovery, which autistic people have been talking around for 30 or 40 years, unsurprisingly. It was about the same time that they also had that light bulb moment that it doesn't just have to be boys who are autistic, that girls can be autistic too, and other genders exist. And so maybe it's more than just a white boy who presents in a particular way kind of thing. So when those two kind of ideas appeared academically at the same time, it was very easy for them to stick themselves together. So it became, firstly, there was a narrative around, well, we've just discovered that all these women are autistic. So that must mean, because we didn't see them before, they must have been masking and hiding from us, because we didn't realize that they were there. Yeah, shocking, Cass. And so they came up with this idea called the female autism phenotype, which is basically that autistic women and girls have a different type of autism, which just like mind blowing, that and completely wrong. And it was all based on this idea that really generalizing that women are more sociable, women are more this, women are more that, and whereas men are the opposite. And actually they're sweeping generalizations and stereotypes, firstly, but secondly to
And
that,
this
what
has to be around the same time that they're trying to like sort out the whole high functioning. It's got to be
yeah,
around, like they're always trying to like put them in like lots of different classifications.
yeah, it's literally every time. It's like whack-a-mole with these different phenotypes. It's that every time one rears its head, someone sticks a hammer on it and it goes back down again, but then two or three more pop up.
Yeah.
And they're constantly trying to carve us up into tiny little boxes, when actually, what they should really be doing is carving us up into 20 million different boxes, because we're all unique individual people, but there's a shared and relatable experience that goes through the core of being autistic. And because academics look through there's different lenses of kind of racism and sexism and ageism and classism and all sorts of kind of different lenses that a lot of academics don't realize that they're looking through, that they're influenced by these things. Then that means that the ideas or the concepts that they come up with then become really warped and twisted because they've been affected by this lens, and then they reinforce loads of problems. So within masking, it became this idea that, well, boys and men don't mask because we found them, and women and girls do mask because we didn't find them. So when in actual fact, it's very this idea around gender doesn't incorporate the way that people are socialized. It doesn't incorporate different experiences. It doesn't incorporate anything like that. The way that women and girls are looked at generally, as a kind of a second class status in comparison to men. All of those kind of things weren't taken into account. It's just very much, oh look, we didn't see you before, so here's a whole new type of autism, and then we plant our flag in that, like we've just discovered a new island, or we've discovered a new creature, or it's psychologists playing at being scientists who are making discoveries when they're not making discoveries at all.
They just haven't been listening.
No, they haven't been paying attention because of the privilege that they experience and that they don't see.
Oh, this says, what? We're individuals? Who would have ever figured that out? From Caroline. And Bobby says, absolutely, this idea that only males is 100% why it was missed for decades. And then no thoughts for non-binary, queer, LGBTQIA. for sure. Psychologists playing at being scientists. This will be my this will be my thumbnail for this. I love that quote. And it's and it's almost like with all of the co-occurring conditions, like none of them being brought out. Is
No.
that
That's part of it as well, and that's that conversation that we had a very, very long time ago. Is again at the key, and again, all of this is intersectionality, and this is why it's at the heart of it all. That if you think back to that early idea of the spectrum that Lorna Wing and Uta Thrift decided upon, Uta Thrift predominantly, this idea that you're one thing or another thing or another thing, never ever took into account that people present differently because of who they are, because of what their identity is, and because of all the things that make up their identity. So that might be their upbringing, that might be their race or their ethnicity, that might be their sexuality, that might be whether they're religious or not, but it also might be the different things that might be going on in their bodies that we don't take into account for because we have the autism umbrella that everything's just swept underneath. And so again, this idea of masking presents in a particular way, which has been the historical narrative. And again, it's a very kind of, it's a white middle class kind of narrative there. It's a high functioning narrative. And there's this awful term that people use now, which is high masking, which is just another functioning label, which is just, again.
Yeah, I saw it the other day when I made a post on my page, and it was about high functioning, low functioning, how that's just unhelpful. And then somebody said high masking, and that's a new one for me. What is that?
So that's something that we pick apart in the book. Again, it's that concept that masking is only one thing, which is hiding and suppressing yourself or appearing more neurotypical. So suppressing aspects of yourself so you appear more neurotypical and fit in. Well, what that does is discludes anybody that's different in any other way that they can't suppress. So if you're black, you can't suppress being black. And there are the black community who's taught for years about passing and maybe language change, communication changes, and changing the way you move maybe a bit, and things like that. Appearing, but you're still black, so you're still very obviously not white. And the same goes for people with co-occurring physical disabilities. Mm-hmm. So if you're someone with an intellectual disability or apraxia of speech or has Tourette's, or your ability to fit in suddenly goes out of the window because there are obvious ways within which you are not the same as everybody else or the same as the majority or what they like to think of themselves. So I got thinking about this a long time ago when I had an autistic client come up to me who said, I've never masked, I've never ever been able to suppress any aspect of myself. Other people see me for who I am, and when I'm with other people, I take my autism out and I polish it in front of them, meaning they project rather than suppress. And I sat with this for quite a while, and I was thinking, that's still masking. It's still changing your behavior based on how other people are treating you and perceiving you, which is what fundamentally masking is. So that really sent me down this line of something that we've talked a bit about before when I've talked about projecting acceptability.
Yeah.
Where other people perceive you in certain ways and you kind of give them what they need. And for some people that might be becoming small and fitting in and being the meek and the quiet one or the fawning one or, the people pleaser, but for other people that might mean going big. That might mean giving people what they expect because they expect you to behave in certain ways. So you exaggerate those behaviors. And all of this is happening completely unconsciously. It's like a developmental thing that you learn as you grow older and older and older, dependent on how you're treated. But all of that includes people with intellectual disabilities, people with co-occurring physical, because they're human beings. And these are human behaviors. We all change our behaviors in response to stress and trauma and the environments we find ourselves in. So when we're talking about narratives like high masking, what we're actually doing is excluding human behaviors from other humans, which is eugenics. So, it's that high functioning, low functioning narrative. I'm good enough because I can be capitalism
I
and
can
I
fit
can
in.
contribute, and
Right.
or you're not good enough because you can't, and it's still the same kind of arguments going on and the same conversations, and it's really, really awful.
That's interesting. That gives me a lot to think about because it is the same thing as saying I'm high functioning because I am able to do that
Yeah,
and I'm able to fit in.
yeah.
I know, Caroline, I'm over here. He's not supposed to blow my mind and make me like quiet. That's not the point of an interview, is it? When you started teaching about projecting rather than suppressing, my mind was completely blown. I mentioned it to my son's best friend's mom, and it led him to being able to finally get his autism diagnosis. And Bobby said, learning about unconscious masking is how I had my aha moment. Oh, wow, I am autistic. So, Kieran, break it down. Like, let's just say you're talking to somebody who is brand new, a brand new parent, somebody who's never even heard of masking. I'm sure that there are doctors who have never heard of masking. Let's just keep it real. You're a teacher. You've never heard of masking. How would you describe that to like really breaking it down to like just how it presents, what it is, and what is the function of it?
Yeah. So all human beings do something called context switching, which is we act a little bit differently in different environments and in response to the different people that we're with. So, Megan, you might be a completely different person if you were in a bar with your friends than you might be with your mum and dad at home. You might, or
Absolutely.
if you're in a workplace, or we change our behavior dependent on those kind of things. But we also change our behavior in response to situations and environments that we find ourselves in, whether those are healthy environments or unhealthy environments, or safe or unsafe environments. Now, in order to understand this, you have to reframe kind of your thinking about what autism is and what autistic people experience, because a lot of people think that autistic people are neurotypical people with broken bits, and that's not the case at all. We're talking about people who process sensory information in a very different way, move, communicate, do things in a very different way. Not right, not wrong, just different. Um, so when you look through that lens, you realize that a lot of the environments, and when we're talking about the environment, we're not just talking about the room we're in, we're talking about the communication, the sensory stuff, the emotional environment, the
Who
trauma
we're
and things that people
around.
bring
Yeah.
in, and yeah, the expectations of us in those environments.
Mhm.
When you look through that reframed lens of what autistic experience is and what it means to be autistic, you realize autistic people are in unsafe environments an awful lot of the time, because their needs are not anticipated or expected or catered for. Other people's needs are, because those needs are the ones that the world's been designed to fit around, predominantly, not perfectly, but for the most part. Whereas you've got groups of people who cannot fit around those needs and then have to do something about that. When the expectation is on you from a very early age to be in these environments, then that
And to
means that,
behave in these
and to behave and
environments. Right.
conform and do all those things,
Accordingly, yeah.
then you're going to respond to that in whatever way you're able to, that keeps you as safe as you possibly can be. Now, like I said, for some people that might mean, and this is where this is new for lots of people, because those people that have heard of masking probably do think about the fitting in and the appearing more neurotypical. But even for people who can't do that, that exaggeration of behavior often keeps them safe because it's expected for other people. They expect autistic people to be melting down, to be having behavioral problems, to have to present challenging behavior and all of those things. So actually becoming bigger gives people what they need. So all of this is based on prediction. Now, humans love to be able to predict things because that helps keep us safe. That helps us know
Right.
what's coming and know how to respond to things. So by projecting a version of myself which meets someone else's needs, that keeps them safe for me, because then that keeps me safe for them.
So it's
So
like an adaptation
yeah,
for
absolutely. So So for people who do suppress maybe more, or fit in maybe more, or try to do those things, because nobody's 100% perfect at this, even if people think they're brilliant at it, usually you're not. That's just your perception of it.
Right.
But that element of safety is kind of key to all of this, for even the people that are projecting and getting punished for that big behavior. That's still expected. And if you think about this idea that we've had for a very long time, that autistic people are very, rigid and have to have structure and have to plan and expect things and don't do change and all of those things, which is a much bigger nuanced conversation than that surface conversation there. But if we lean into that a little bit and say autistic people do need that level of structure a little bit more, even if you make yourself big and other people treat you negatively, well, that's what you
You're
can plan
expecting
for. You
that.
know what that feels like. You know
Yeah.
what to expect. If you made yourself small, you can't predict what other people are going to do about that. So therefore, that becomes unsafe. So even that punishment has an element of safety to it. That conformity has an element of safety to it, because that means that you can just know what other people are going to do. You can predict how they're going to respond to you. So it's really, really, it's deep and it's complicated. But on a surface level, all we've ever talked about masking is we put on our mask, we go into a social situation, and then we take it off again. And that's not what's happening. That's a very tiny aspect of a huge, complex human behavior. So for those people that are new to it, that probably wasn't the best, most easy introduction. But there isn't really a simple way of explaining this, because it's big and there's so many different parts to it. And what we do have to understand at the heart of it is that this is a person that is unsafe and is feeling unsafe and has experienced unsafety in the past. So when that's an overwhelming kind of negative, unsafe lot of experiences, then that's going to shape who you are and how you respond to other people. And then that might mean a whole multitude of things.
It fits in so well to my favorite book, besides yours, of course, the Beyond Behaviors book.
Yeah.
It fits in so well because in here Mona talks about, there was a sentence that just resonated with me about kids in school and them having, these behaviors or melting down or acting out or whatever it is because they don't feel safe.
Yeah.
And she said that just because you as an adult in the situation don't sense any danger, just because you don't sense any danger, just because you know it's safe, does not mean that it feels that way. And that doesn't mean that that you can take that away from them. It doesn't mean that they feel safe at all, because they're not safe. If they don't feel safe, they're not safe.
It's safety is subjective in the same way that trauma is subjective. Different things, something may traumatize you and I might experience that thing and it might not traumatize me. So safety works they go hand in hand together. So safety works in exactly the same way. If you don't feel safe in the environment, that doesn't mean that everybody doesn't feel safe there. But equally, if you feel safe, it doesn't mean that everybody feels safe as well. And that, I think, so many professionals in professional spheres, and I think maybe this goes for all of us, but we're all trapped in our heads and we're all trapped in our own experiences. And it takes a lot of hard work to think outside of our experience. And I've talked to you about, and you talk about it in the book as well, about the double empathy problem, and that it's really difficult if you haven't experienced what someone else has experienced to even come close to understanding what that means to them. It's really hard, and that goes from person to person, from group to group, from adult to child. If someone has experienced something unique that you haven't, you can't empathize with that. It's impossible for you to do so. It's impossible for you to get in their shoes and think about and feel what they experience at all. So when we're talking about safety, that requires those that have the power within those environments to get out of their heads, to think about, actually, just because I feel okay right now doesn't mean that everybody else feels okay. And just because I feel like I'm communicating well, behaving well, or treating someone kindly doesn't actually mean that it's landing in the way that I intend. So, a lot of this is about responsibility and about really professional kind of privilege and power hierarchies and deconstructing those.
I just want to give an example for someone who is trying to kind of put this into like context, into like a day-to-day activity. One example, one of my kids was having a very hard time at school during the time I was reading Beyond Behavior. So this was like really resonated with me. And he was out in these learning cottages outside of the school. And in order to go anywhere else, like to music or lunch or whatever, he would have to leave the learning cottage and go into the main building. And he would have such a hard time during those transitions. And the teachers are like, I don't, we're trying to support him. We don't know what's wrong. We're just going from here to here. And what they're not realizing is like transitions are so hard for a lot of autistic people. And you're talking about leaving the safety of the classroom, if it felt safe to him to begin with, going to wherever you're taking him, and it's a different place each time. So not knowing where they're going out into the outside world with whatever weather is there, and that's always changing. Going inside, you don't know who's going to be there. You don't know what environment, like if they're changing classes during the day. I mean, you can break it down so many ways of how my kid was not feeling safe that day, right? Every time he leaves, he has to have this onslaught of unexpected, I don't even know what the word for that is, but just like not knowing where he's going or what he's doing or who's going to be there or what it's going to be like. So yeah, that doesn't feel safe to him. And just because you think it's safe because you are an adult who knows where you're going and knows what it's going to look like and know that you're going to be okay, doesn't mean that the kid feels that way. So that's just one example of that lack of understanding. Yeah.
And how that has been, that lack of understanding. I mean, that's a perfect example, because that lack of understanding has been pathologized, and that the phrase that I think you might have been looking for there was intolerance of uncertainty. That idea that autistic people are just completely intolerant of anything that they don't know about. It's completely, like any change is bad and everything is awful. But actually, that's a surface, superficial kind of neurotypical perspective on, actually, this is someone who is feeling deeply unsafe for a lot of reasons. They might even be in a completely safe environment, but stuff that's happened previously has made them feel unsafe. So actually anything new coming at them, or anything that is unexpected, is actually going to provoke quite a strong response. And this is something, I mean, I've seen this in myself. I have become so much more able to deal with even big change, quite dramatic big change coming on without short notice, as I've gotten older, and particularly over the last kind of 10-15 years, because I've understood myself better, and I can meet my needs better. I understand my sensory processing. I've taken, I've got agency and autonomy in lots of aspects of my life.
That is
So my
important.
ability to deal with big change is because I feel safe, and I've spent a long time feeling relatively safe. But when you've spent even even maybe a couple of years, maybe you've only been at school for a couple of years, if you've only spent that amount of time feeling unsafe, that's a big part of your life, first of all, that you've been discombobulated in and disconnected and worried and anxious, and you might not have the language to describe or advocate any of this, but
Right.
you're feeling it still. Your body's feeling it. So again, this is something we address in the book, which is reframing that narrative to seeking safety and predictability. So the need for things to be really, really predictable actually comes from a place of, no, I need to feel safe. And the only way I can feel safe is by knowing what's coming and knowing what's going to happen to me. And when I don't know what's going to happen to me, well, that invokes all of those big feelings and those big responses and those big worries. And for some people that comes out, and for some people that turns inward and gets swallowed up and comes out at a later date. But all of that is feeding things like autistic burnout. It's feeding things like bodily responses like autoimmune dysfunction and things
Oh
like
yeah.
that. So all these
Constant
random
stress.
rashes and pains and stuff like that, tummy problem, all of this is being fed by anxiety. So once we can make that anxiety dissipate or mitigate it a little bit, actually you'll probably find that those things become better because that person feels a bit safer. And that's the key to all of this. If we can make autistic people, if we can help autistic people feel safe, that's 99% of our problems gone away, you know. But it's how we meet that and how we recognize what
How
that
do
means.
we react to it?
Yeah.
It's so important. So we have a question. I don't know if you need to take a drink. Did you have a drink today? I know we talked about that. Hold on. We have a question.
There might be something in my Coke.
It's okay if there's not, or if there is. All right. This is an entire question.
Okay.
Cass asked, any thoughts about PDA becoming shorthand for the, okay, you have to wait to the end of the question. I saw your facial expression.
Big sigh.
Thoughts about PDA becoming shorthand for the new high functioning, high masking. I am seeing a lot of ABA strategies may be okay for autistics who are often non-speaking, but not for PDAers in PDA space, and it makes me rage. I'm going to let you take this one. I do have thoughts, though, I will tell you.
Oh, like, how long have we got? So firstly, I think there's big. Oh, Megan, you've disappeared. Then you're back here.
I had to get my
there's big. I have to be careful about how I phrase this because so many people jump on things. When I talk about PDA, if I don't phrase things in the right way, exactly the right way, I get jumped on big style. So probably less so with this. And I know Cass kind of knows me and knows how I talk about stuff like this. But there are big problematicness within PDA, within that narrative anyway. I think there is a significant group of people who are having a significantly different experience, firstly. So there is absolutely there is a fundamental truth to the PDA narrative. But I think how it's been popularized and kind of conceptualized, I think, firstly, it's been conflated with autistic burnout in a lot of big ways. Suddenly the children or adults who suddenly manifest this deep demand avoidance that comes from within, which is in response to other people's demands and demands you put on yourselves and things like that. That also that happens within PDA, and there's much bigger experience around that, but that also happens in autistic burnout as well. So there has been a conflation of those things. So I think there is a large number of people who are being given that label, and it's not even a label because it's not a diagnosis or anything yet. It's just a name for something. So not that we need a diagnosis for it to become real, but you know what I mean with that. It's like people have been my child or I am PDA without actually, there's nobody agrees on what PDA is. So that's a big part of the problem. Even people within the PDA community talk about it very differently in lots of ways. So that's a big part of that. Secondly, then, this notion around kind of high masking, I think that's a kind of an add-on to that, because lots of people are now talking about PDA in the same way that Asperger's was spoken about. That, you know, that if you got an Asperger's diagnosis for your child, you breathed a sigh of relief because it wasn't autism. You know, because autism means all these negative things, and then Asperger's meant your child is intellectual and able to communicate well and high functioning, and they'll get a job and they'll do this and that. And it didn't mean that at all. It didn't mean any of those things, but that was the kind of idea that was attached to it. So I think this kind of diluting of what PDA is, which is something that's very really happening, has contributed to this idea that only PDA people do certain things, and therefore this high masking narrative is a PDA. Now, people who are PDA do mask because it's a human behavior, like I've said. So that might mean a lot of things. And for someone who is actually PDA, the use of resources in order to be able, if you're suppressing aspects of yourself around, if you're trying to, you know, suppress your demand avoidance, that's a huge thing to do. So if those things are kind of happening for you, then that's going to contribute to a much larger kind of burnout narrative and a much more kind of prevalent one. But I think yeah, this high masking narrative and how it's been attached to PDA is a part of that high functioning kind of narrative, and my child's this and your child isn't this. And again, it's that separating of experiences without really understanding what those experiences are or what's contributing to them.
Can I take it a little further?
You can.
So as an outsider looking in, just looking at the conversation like a kind of like a snowball almost, because I am not fully versed on PDA. I am, I'm not in those spaces. I know Christy Forbes is about to talk about PDA at the Lives in the Balance Summit that is coming up. She's keynoting for Lives in the Balance, and is going to be talking about PDA. And I trust Christy to do like a fantastic job about talking about things. I mean, she's very, very knowledgeable. But as an outsider looking in, I look at PDA as being the privileged version of ODD. That's what I see it. When I see people talking about PDA in conversations, and this is not from Christy, I haven't even really gone into those conversations with Christy, but a lot of the conversations are, I see privileged people talking about PDA when not so privileged people are still getting the ODD diagnosis. And it's almost like taking ODD, making it privilege. I don't know a better way to say that, but like taking ODD characteristics of what used to be called ODD and still is being used on Black boys in America today, right? Like they're not getting the autism diagnosis, they're getting ODD, which is oppositional defiant disorder. Defiant is in the name, and being labeled with that instead of autism, and that's following them. But then we have more privileged people who are taking kind of the same things and calling it PDA and taking great pride in their PDA-ness. And I don't think anything's wrong with reframing it, but I do think that we need to make sure that we're including everybody in that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that right, and I don't have a script yet, so forgive me.
Absolutely hear you completely, and that's something that's replicated here as well, because Black boys are more likely to get either oppositional defiance disorder diagnosis or ADHD as a secondary kind of diagnosis, but the autism gets ignored or isn't even perceived, because that ODD diagnosis is behavior, and that's what the white racist narrative of Black people is that they are badly behaved and challenging and loud and aggressive, and it goes back to that kind of it's colonialism, isn't it? It goes back to that kind of the British Empire notion that anybody that wasn't British needed to be civilized because they were uncivilized, and that all feeds into those ideas and those concepts. So I do absolutely hear you. And that PDA narrative is again a very white middle class narrative again, and it's not that those children or adults are experiencing anything different. They're being perceived through different lenses, like we were talking about before around gender. It's again those same kind of perceptions. It's that lens of racism there, which is deeply problematic. But the people that champion PDA are predominantly white middle class people who aren't getting out of their own heads, and it's
well, I don't think that that's a bad thing either, as long as it's being reflected across the board. Like I don't think that there's any. I'm glad that we're reframing that kind of defiant behavior and then into like a need for autonomy and a need for, I don't think anything's wrong with that, but I think it needs to go the span and make sure that we're not leaving people out.
Yeah. And I think another part of the problem is that this is a narrative that has grown up in the UK and has gone out from the UK, and the race discussion in the UK is nowhere near as advanced as it is in the US. And obviously things are awful. Like, that sounds like a really perverse thing to say, doesn't it? But the actual, I mean, the conversation is nowhere near as progressive here as it is there. So I think it's not even in people's headspaces to even think that that might be an issue. There's
Yeah.
so much privilege there around that it's not even, people don't even conceptualize it as a possibility. It just doesn't enter their heads at all. It's just, oh look, here's my experience. There's another white person. It's my experience. There's another white. Not thinking about actually where are the where are the global majority people within this conversation, because they're
Right.
not there. And it's yeah, it's messy, and it's yeah, it's a deep problem. And I think, like you, I have no issue with the reframing of ODD. I think that's something that desperately needs to happen. And also the discussions around, I've never ever come across someone who's identified themselves as PDA who I also didn't think was ADHD and didn't have a lot of deep trauma and generational trauma as well. Parents who had experienced lots of maybe alcohol abuse or whatever, and or all sorts of awful things going back generationally. So I think none of that is really being taken into account either. And I noticed Caroline made a comment earlier around this kind of, there's this new idea around PDA is this individual thing on its own. You don't even have to be autistic to be PDA, which is just bizarre to me, because this is where it all came from. That there were autistic people experiencing
Interesting.
something
Yeah.
different. And but again, I think that feeds into that, what I mentioned earlier around it's being talked about in the same way that Asperger's was talked about, that it's a difference that actually it marks our children or ourselves out as something very, very different to everybody else. And I do see that need for people who aren't experiencing the mainstream kind of narrative to put their hands up and say, hello, there's something else going on here. But I think we have to be cautious when we do that we don't just create something new and separate and compartmentalize like we were
Right.
talking earlier. We're just thinking up new boxes. And yeah,
Right. Right. And that I mean, I can't even I hesitate to even talk about this question here, Cass, because I don't know enough about PDA to even have like an opinion on it. But Cass says, I think that's why it really upsets me that non-speaking autistics are often left out of the PDA being talked about, because we're leaving behind the most vulnerable. And honestly, I don't even know enough about PDA to say if it's even like, yeah, I just don't know enough about it. Kieran, do you have thoughts on that? I just don't know.
yeah.
I
And
don't
again,
know if I want my kids to have another, like, I don't know. Uh,
but I mean, do they need it? Is that is that a thing?
they haven't, yeah, I mean, I feel like they have enough, like, label. That's why I'm saying, let me just stop saying anything, because I don't know the answer to this.
No. But Cass is right. It's again, it's that example of a lack of intersectionality being taken into account. That we're all unique individual human beings with different things going on, and most of those different things never get explored, or we only stumble across them by accident. I only figured out for myself about 18 months, 2 years ago, that I've got HEDS, hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and that I've been in lots of pain all my life and hadn't realized that other people weren't.
What you
And
have,
weird
what,
things happen.
Kieran? What was that?
Hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome.
Oh, yes. Okay.
So like connective tissue in my joints and things. So like I have joints that just pop out and pop back in again and things, and more than that, that's the kind of most obvious kind of bit to explain about it. But so I'm someone who has talked about HEDS for a long time as a co-occurring condition, and it took having a conversation with someone else who framed it in a way which kind of made a light bulb go off for me, that I was like, oh,
Oh,
and this
I
is
do
I'm
that.
someone who talks about this and taught this and didn't even see it for myself. So, so we don't know enough about ourselves. We don't know enough about our autistic experiences. We don't know enough around all the things that are going on around and within us. But yet we were quite quick to come up with these labels and group people and say that this is something, when actually we don't know enough about it to be able to say that it is something. Do you know, it horrifies people when I tell them there's no such thing as autism. It absolutely terrifies people when I say that, and they say, "Well, you're autistic." Yeah, I am autistic, but there's no such thing as autism.
Not a
And that
thing.
their heads, their brains just explode because it's a box and it's a label, and that's it. It's set in stone, but it isn't.
Um, Facebook user, if you want your name to show up, you have to click on the link above the post to just to grant your permission, because I don't know who you are, but that's okay if you don't want to be up here, because this will be a public video at some point, or now actually, because we're streaming to YouTube as well. So you said, and now it's sensory processing rather than autism. I see a lot of parents and groups not wanting to accept autism, but rather the more privileged sounding sensory processing and only sensory processing. That's a whole bucket of worms right there, isn't it? Because when I remember asking about sensory processing and my doctor saying like, no, that's not a thing. That's not real. Like, what? So my kid having it, struggles processing their sensory is not a real thing. What?
Yeah, it's
That's like a double-edged sword one right there, I think.
it is. It is. Well, because the silly thing is, that's literally what autism is. That's the bizarre thing with all this. But again, it was sensory processing disorder, and that disorder narrative is completely wrong and can be argued against really strongly and reframed. Monotropism is something that can kind of reframe that conversation. But yeah, I see it all the time, and I see Cass has said about or someone else has said about highly sensitive people, which is kind of the same narrative around. But it's people who look at what their idea of what autism is, and they don't see that themselves or their children or the children that they see don't match up with that very small, rigid
Very
construct.
narrow view, yeah.
Yeah. And don't understand why it's a very rigid construct, and don't even recognize that it is a construct, and then come up with a whole new way of describing people because they don't fit this box, so we'll just make a new box. Or we'll dig up an old box that we got rid of 20 years ago and we'll bring it back again, and which is what SPD is. Yeah, it's just.
I remember when Ross Green came on in the book club, and he kind of caught a little crap for what he said. But now that a year or two has gone by and I'm seeing these conversations, I understand. He said, I don't really focus on labels. Like, I don't really care what diagnosis a kid has. And he kind of caught a little bit of crap for it, well, autism is very important. It is very important to get diagnosed, and it's protected under the ADA and things like that. But now that I've seen all of these different conversations, these different, all these things popping up with PDA, which is not actually recognized in the States, but ODD and SPD and all of these different things, he's kind of right. I mean, you just have to look at the kid and see we're talking about kids in that interview. You have to look at them as an individual to see like what kind of support that they need. And it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, he's absolutely right, and I agree with him 100%. It would be lovely to think that one day we can get to a place where we don't need these diagnoses. At the minute, we can argue that diagnosis is important, but that's because we need them, because it's a gatekeeper to all sorts of different things. That's the only reason it's important. And it's years ago, I learned something from a colleague of mine, Chloe Farahar, who said that there is a very real difference between autism and autistic experience. So when we're talking about autistic experience, that's looking at you as a whole human. That's looking at every aspect of who you are, all the things that play into what makes you who you are, your experiences, your reaction to things, and the way you communicate, all those things, and what you need is based on those things. And that's how we identify what you need, by looking at your autistic experience. If we look at you as autism, we don't know what your needs are at all, because autism is just 3 paragraphs in a book which has 350.
And even if you have like a label in front of the autism, it still does not tell you anything.
It doesn't tell you anything. And if you understand neurodiversity, lots of people don't understand neurodiversity, but the people that do understand neurodiversity know what it means, that it's inclusive of all human beings on the planet. There's no labels in neurodiversity, no labels at all, because it's actually it rips up the medical paradigm and throws it out the window and looks at the whole human and looks at you as a unique individual human being. So while I would say that it is important to understand your autistic experience, it is less important, other than through that gatekept way, to understand to have that label of autism, because that label of autism is just a construct. It's just lots of people over the course of the last 100 and so years have just come up with some ideas, and that's what they think this thing is. Whereas autistic experience is about you as a human being and what you need and what's going to help you and what's going to support you. So I completely agree with Ross.
Bobby said official diagnosis, sadly, is the only way to get the support your child needs. That's another thing that I found to be almost a double-edged sword as well. While, I mean, just like Kieran just said, I mean, and what you're saying is, yes, the diagnosis is very important. It's protected under laws, under disability laws, things like that. It's very important. But I also have found that, at least in the States, that it doesn't actually guarantee you any services except for maybe protections under, legal, whatever, ADA or whatever that is. But I found that every service that you try to get, they do their own evaluation, and it's not based off of diagnosis. It's based off of what supports they need. And I've learned this as I've gone along. Yes, I think that diagnosis is very important, but it also doesn't actually do what I thought it was going to do.
No.
It never really, it was not a magic key, but it did help me find the autistic community. I think that was like probably the most important thing that it helped me with. But in terms of every service that we've ever applied for, they all do their own evaluations on, activities of daily living, support needs, and things like that.
Yeah, I'd agree. And it is, I have that same thought here, because I see parents clamoring all the time for a diagnosis, and we have the NHS here. Obviously, you have your own very unique special healthcare system, and we're lucky enough to have the NHS. But unfortunately, with the NHS, sometimes you have to wait a very long time in order to be able to get what you need from it. So waiting lists for diagnosis here range from 2 years up to 9 years, depending on where you are in the country and where you live. So I see parents clamoring for this diagnosis, and they get on this diagnostic pathway, and it takes as long as it takes to get. And then at the end of it, they get pushed out the door, and then they fall flat on their faces, because what they think the diagnosis is going to do is trigger all of this support. And it doesn't. There's no, and if you think about the support, think about the US, the support that exists once you have that diagnosis is ABA.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, that is true. Yeah, it does kind of
Actually, what
triggers that. It automatically
the benefit of that diagnosis for you, if it's going to trigger access to a therapy which is going to cause your child problems?
We're not calling it a therapy.
We're not. No,
that's my rule.
What are we calling it? Just the
ABA, or spelling it out is fine, but it's not therapy. It's not performed by therapists.
That's fair. That's absolutely fair. So here we don't, ABA isn't as prevalent. It's the framework of PBS is more prevalent here, which is an ABA framework. Same. But even here, you go back to the majority of schools don't know what they're doing. So they don't know how to support your child well enough, or even if they've got the will to support your child well, they haven't got the capacity to support your child. We have EHCPs here, which are like your IEPs. So you can get the needs identified, and they're written into law, and everybody has to do what they do, but they still don't get followed. And quite often the HCPs or the IEPs aren't written in a way which actually meets that child needs at all. It's usually a tick box of things that they're just given because autism is their label. So you know,
Well, segregation is one they're going to do real quick, right? I mean,
again,
segregation is one that
yeah,
they do, at least in the States, very quickly. Oh, autism. Okay, well, we have a program for those
yeah.
kids. So that's something that happens very quickly.
Here it's the opposite, and they try very hard to keep kids in mainstream schools, but they can't meet need in mainstream schools. So you end up with the same problem, same result, but the different kind of avenue of getting there. So yeah, so it's kind of the only thing that it does do is, and even actually you don't need a diagnosis for this, is that there are certain benefits, paid benefits that you can get for having a disabled child. So it can strengthen your argument for getting that
Yes,
benefit.
that's
And
true.
that's
That's
the kind of key thing to it. But one thing I
oh,
would
oh
say
my
is
gosh,
that
Kieran. Go
go
ahead, go
on.
ahead.
No, I was just going to say
We have a
that
comment on YouTube.
do we?
That is so funny. Okay, go ahead, Kieran.
No. All I was going to say is that the one big bonus I think of getting that label is that it's almost like a little flag that you can wave, so you can attract other people with that label as well, and that's a good thing. Or if you're a parent and you can wave that flag and you can connect with other parents, that's where it becomes a useful kind of thing more often than anything else.
So true. I don't know how to say your name, but this person is from YouTube. Hi, YouTube. We were just joking about how I've never checked the YouTube comments, but it said she says it really depends on the state. Oh, that's true. In the U.S., many state programs do provide funding that parents can use for OT, speech, sensory equipment, and do not have to ever use ABA. That's true. And some states don't. It's not an automatic that you get ABA. That's true. In our
Do
state, it's
you,
fully
to
funded.
access those other services, do you need a diagnosis?
It depends. So we also have a program called Early Intervention, and that's nationwide. And what that did back when they started it, this is before everything became ABA. Like this is before all of that. You do not have to have a diagnosis to access early intervention services. There are specific. You just have to have some sort of this is curious, or if you have some sort of physical disability. For instance, DJ, when he was little, his head was like this
Mhm.
when he was a baby, and we didn't know why. So we were able to get a physical therapy referral through early intervention without any diagnosis, and he had torticollis or something, and that showed up. We were able to access without a diagnosis. But that's true that not all states have fully funded ABA, and just in my state they have. Programs for autistic kids. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, I'm looking at all of these comments. I want to make sure I don't even see all of the comments. If I don't ever put your comment up there, it's just because it's not showing up on my streaming platform. And that happens sometimes. My mom could be here and I don't see her. Bobby, if you see my mom commenting, let me know. One
Say hi
time
to
we
I
went
haven't
through a
seen your
whole
mum for
thing.
ages.
Huh?
I said I haven't seen your mum for ages.
She's doing really well. She's doing really
Good.
well. Yes. Um, yes. The southern region has been dominated by ABA. That would be us. I don't think North Carolina has the same things as Virginia though. Yes. Well, oh, so Bobby says we have PBS. And we have, I mean, PBS, and we talk about ABA just as like a program, but I tend not to even talk about ABA in particular because I like to call it behaviorism now, just
Yeah.
straight up. Like no matter what it is dominating the schools, not just for autistic kids, but for all of the kids. It's behaviorism. Um, in our district, we have BCBAs for all kids, and they do functional behavioral assessments on any kind of kid. Class Dojo is one of those like, PBS things that they do. I mean, that's for all kids. So it is behaviorism is dominant everywhere. So it's not like, oh, I'm keeping my kid out of ABA, he's safe. No, that's not.
because they're probably doing it in some other format without even realizing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Why is that doing that? Stop that. Okay, I
that's
turned it off.
how PBS works here. It's that model of behaviorism is basically it's ABA. It's identifying behaviors you don't want and then seeking ways to eradicate them. But whoever gets to decide the behaviors that we don't want is usually someone with problematic views around behavior
Well,
that doesn't
and
understand the whole
whoever
human
is
experience.
deciding, when they do their antecedents to decide the why behind
Mm.
it, they get to decide that. Just
Yeah,
like we were talking about earlier, you don't get to decide why the kid is having a hard time, right? You're only looking at it from your lens. So when you do the A in the ABC model, you're just you're guessing. You're
yeah,
making a
you're making a
judgment call.
judgment. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so that we took a turn into uncharted
We did.
territory. That's always fun. uh Not the safest thing to talk about these days, but at least it is the book club. So um yes, Stacy said, as a former public school educator, I've seen behavior become the number one focus for all students. And it's about test scores and conforming. So sad to see that the schools are no longer student centered. Yeah, I mean, exactly. Like that's exactly what's happening. The testing, that's all they're caring about these days.
Yeah,
And I'm using a blanketed, I'm sorry, I'm gonna hide this real quick, Caroline. Just as a disclaimer, I am not against teachers, I'm not against educators. We are talking about systemic issues. We love teachers, we love paraprofessionals, we love all of the people who are in the schools doing, working, learning. These are just systemic issues we're talking about.
and teachers aren't allowed to be teachers anymore. I think that's the
Right.
biggest problem. That teachers are no longer allowed to curate creativity and curiosity. They're not given the time or capacity to do so. A teacher, for me, is a curator of information and knowledge. It's someone who creates a space within which someone can learn about things that they're interested in and which are going to be useful for them. And
No time for that. Right.
that's not what schools are about anymore, and that's not a problem with teachers. That's a problem, like you said, with the systemic environments and the fact that schools and the education system have this notion that they're preparing children for the real world, but the world that they're preparing children for doesn't exist. It maybe existed 50, 60, 100 years ago. This idea of people who are academic went on to get big jobs and things like that. That's not the reality anymore. That all sorts of people live in all sorts of different ways and learn in all sorts of different ways, and we've drilled that notion out, and we've become very, very core centered on a very narrow way of doing things. And yeah, it's just standardized testing is just a complete waste of time, in my opinion.
Yeah. And it's the lobbyists, it's just, it is like it's the lobbyists for the testing companies. And
Yeah, people
that's
making
just
money
why
out
it
of it.
keeps going on. Yeah. Yeah. Caroline, thank you for repeating your question because I did not see it last time. So Kieran, how do you approach teaching teachers and school staff about masking? Meaning not a training, but advocating for a student.
I need another drink. It's yeah, not fun. So
It's a great question, though.
it's a
Breaking
really
it
good question.
down. Yeah.
Yeah, I think obviously it depends. It depends on a number of. I'm going to sit on the fence a little bit here, Caroline. And say it depends on a number of factors. Firstly, it depends on the teacher you're advocating to, how open they are to the possibility that they might not know what they're doing well enough, or that their ideas around how that child should be in school and things, you know, whether they're open to that being picked apart a little bit and actually saying, maybe this is a you problem and not a them problem. So that's the first kind of factor. The second factor is obviously the child and what's happening and the context of that. But generally, it's I mean, like Caroline, you know me. I don't hold back. I go in hard, but with an arm around someone, because at the end of the day, we're talking about if a child is experiencing this to the point where someone's had to go in and advocate to a teacher, that's a problem. That's a big problem. And you've gone beyond the interventional kind of stage there because it's manifested as a big, big problem. So I think about the importance of the teacher understanding that it's now a big problem, that this isn't something that a couple of reasonable adjustments are going to fix. Those reasonable adjustments should have been there in the first place, and maybe they might have made a little bit of a difference to the outcome. But this is a big place we're in now where there are that's big trauma. So it's helping that teacher understand exactly what it is that that child has experienced, which has brought them to this point. So that might not just be school, that might be factors outside of school, that might be factors from before coming into school. But school's going to be a massive part of that problem. And if it's helping the teachers bring it down to kind of, what's within their power to change. So quite often, if I talk to a teacher about an environment and changing the environment, they quite often jump to the assumption that we're talking about, well, everybody has to do things differently in order to meet the needs of one child. But actually, no, this is about thinking about, well, if it's not safe for one child, it's probably not safe for a number of children. So actually, are there things that we can do on a much broader basis, which is going to help everybody and is going to mitigate the effects of what's happening to a larger group of people? So there are things that obviously some teachers can't control, like how the education system expects them to do things and things like that. There are little things they can do within that. But this is really about actually you as a teacher, and I know teachers are completely under the cosh in terms of time, a lack of support, a lack of funding, a lack of teaching assistants and things. That's the same in the US as it is here. You are one person with probably a large group of children and a lot of the very different needs within that. But also that's your job. And you've taken that job on. Maybe it wasn't like that at the beginning when you first started teaching, but it is your job now. That's part of your job now. And your job is to make sure that each of those children in that class have as good as experience as is absolutely possible. Now, I don't think any child is going to thrive in a school. I don't think that's possible when there are so many diverse needs and we have the problems that we have now. But that doesn't mean that a child can't have a good experience within a school a lot of the time. It's never going to be perfect. But so actually, it's like, how do we make it small, first of all? And then how do we start enlarging that small thing? Little things that we can do to make sure. But it's helping that teacher understand that that child is unsafe and is feeling unsafe and has felt unsafe for a long amount of time. And if they think about any situation or a long period of time where they might have felt unsafe, what that did to their brain, what that did to their relationships, what that did to how they communicated, how they felt, whether it made them feel ill, all of those kind of things, making it tangible for them and making it real. But again, coming back to that fence sitting of it very much depends on the context of who you're talking to and how well they are able to kind of embrace that and understand that, because some people just can't. And that's an issue where I think then you start thinking about, is that the right environment for that child to remain in?
And Cass did say, and asked if you had seen NeuroWild's illustrations about masking. And I have not seen that particular one. NeuroWild
No.
has fabulous illustrations that kind of just illustrate what this might look like or what is actually going on. And even if I'm not using like NeuroWilds, there are all sorts of like very bite-sized education things, like Bex Burgess has that art of autism. What is autism? It's still relevant even after years of it being up there. It's very good. Having those bite-sized learning opportunities for teachers, if the teacher is open to it, even if the teacher or team is not open to it, you still bring it. You still say, we're going to look at this today, and do that little bit of teaching, even if they're not all the way open to it. It's still they're still professionals and they're there in the room with you. So just bringing those, always having something to share. I've shared Kieran's articles before, even books. I've brought in books before, and honestly, none of them have been about masking in particular. But I think Kieran's book, it's talking about masking, but it's talking about all of the topics within that. When we're talking about trauma, when we're talking about, I mean, it's all of the things. Yeah, Bobby said gentle education. It really does have to be that way. I mean, unless you're facing a real crisis, right? I mean, then it's we're talking about rights and laws and legal stuff. But if you have a team that, your kid is not in crisis at the moment, keeping that gentle education going and just building upon it. And that is also hard because of the state of education with teachers. The turnover rate is so high. So you're spending time educating a teacher your kid's not going to have next year. So then it becomes like it is never ending, but I think it's well worth the effort.
I agree. And I think what you just said there is exactly why things tend to fall apart more in high school in the US and secondary school here, where there's lots of different teachers involved and there's that movement from class to class with different teachers and things. And, that at least when your child has the same teacher for a year or 2 years, there's an opportunity there to build a relationship.
Yeah.
And there isn't once you come out of that, and once you're engaging with maybe 10, 15 different subject teachers. It's that's a lot of people to be dealing with, and that's a lot of people to be repeating things to, and then like you said, the high turnover, they might disappear after 6 months and somebody else steps in. And none of these are problems with teachers or the children that they're teaching. These are systemic problems that we have an education system in the US and North America which hasn't changed for nearly 200 years. Everything else in the world has changed apart from education. And that's just messed up. That's absolutely messed up. That's clinging onto something that doesn't exist anymore. And it's now very obviously creating problems. But I think, just going back to Caroline's question there, maybe also thinking about, look, we've thought about things in a particular, not just autism, all sorts of things in a very kind of rigid way for a very long time. And now we are at a change point in the human narrative where we're reconceptualizing what sex and gender means. We're reconceptualizing what it means in terms of like neurodiversity and neurodivergence and different ways that people exist. We exist in a world now where self-employment is rife, absolutely rife, where it wasn't as much before, where that was all about trades, but now it's all about creativity and things as well. So there's a whole world of technology out there that didn't exist 10, 15 years ago. So we're on this precipice of absolute change. And in order to meet the needs of their children, they're going to have to be aware of that. And they're really going to have to lean into that hard, as difficult as that is, which means a lot of change going on in their classroom and a lot of reframing what's happening in their classroom. And if they don't do that, then they're just going to get left behind, and they're not going to be able to exist within the space that they've created for themselves.
So true. Y'all want to hear something cool that I did? I haven't posted it on my Facebook because I don't know how I want to frame it. But the other day, so this year we have this unicorn IEP team. We've had a unicorn IEP team for 2 years. Part of the reason I haven't posted about that is because I don't want to brag when everybody I know how bad it is. But we've had this unicorn IEP team for 2 years with Jay, who's non-speaking and fully included. And I've been, making relationships with my work on the SEAC, the Special Education Advisory Committee, for a few years now, just building relationships. And the director of special education asked my IEP team, including me, to do a training for all of the assistant principals in elementary school. And we did. And it was so amazing because when we talk about like how exhausting it is to just keep going with the same, different people every year, like having all that change and not creating that systemic,
Yeah.
like more people. We need more people to hear this. And like, we need like, these are the assistant principals in our district do the special education stuff. That's their job. And so we talked about, the strategies that have been working for us. Like, why is this a unicorn IEP team? Because even like this summer, I wrote an email and CC'd the school board and everybody else, and it's still a unicorn IEP team, even with, problems that have arisen. And I just thought it was just amazing. And one of the things was, Caroline, when you were talking about, if you have so much turnover, right? It's exhausting. I think 3 people said it's exhausting. But having very intentional onboarding of new team members, when you have like different teachers coming on, maybe you have like 1 or 2 that are staying the same from last year, but like before the beginning of the school year, having like an onboarding session. So it's like a completely separate IEP meeting that's not going over goals and not doing all of this, but having an onboarding of information. Like, this is what we as a team have learned for the last few years, and we need to get y'all caught up so that we're not doing that same stuff that has happened before, that we've learned from. And having those intentional conversations that are extra from the IEP meetings has really helped with that high turnover. And it helps the other teachers learn for their other kids that they're going to have next year and the next year and the next year. So those have been really, really
So
impactful.
there's consistency and follow through with it, and which is what's needed, because then it doesn't drop off and disappear at the end of the year and you start again from scratch.
And Cass said it's hard to get those meetings. I think that if you call an IEP meeting with enough time, I think that there needs to be an IEP meeting.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a law that Stacy can come up with. Stacy knows all of the things.
So what's the
things?
what's the follow up to that training then? Have you got a plan to continue that or embed it in some way?
So this was the first time that we did it, and we had so we have the 4th largest district in Virginia, which huge district. So we had 1/3 of the elementary school teachers join us for that. And honestly, I think she was just kind of seeing how it was going to go, because this is the first time that I've done something like that within the school system. All of the time I'm like barking out here. And this, I've been building trust. And so she allowed that to happen within the school system. And part of it was, how do we approach problems and things like that. But another part of it was that she wanted to show that this is not an easy case by any means, right? This is probably the only non-speaking 4th grader that's included in the entire district. I mean, I don't know that for a fact, but I haven't met any other parents in the work that I do. But showing like, yeah, you don't have to segregate these kids in kindergarten, like showing that he is thriving and having a great experience. But yeah, so there's not been any plans yet. Of course, I've already like said, so when we do this again, here's what we need. I'm always pushing for like the next time, but
put them in a position where they can't say no. That's what I try to do.
Right. I think it went really well, and they actually really did ask questions that were very specific, trying to work out in their head, like how do I do that? How, when these challenging behaviors come up, right? That's all they think about is like, because also the assistant principals are the disciplinarians of the school, right? They're the ones that give out the consequences for behaviors for all the kids. So they had very specific questions of like, okay, so when this happens, and somebody is physical, right? Like, how do you approach that? And y'all are still kind of like have trust with one another and things like that. They had really good questions, just trying to work out in their head, how do I do that and still have a good relationship with the entire team, because difficult situations do arise, and we were very candid about the difficult situations that we have had to face together. So I think one of the things we talked about a lot was looking at certain disciplinary actions through a disability lens instead of a lens of discipline, right? Support instead of discipline was a big theme throughout the whole conversation.
That's huge, Megan.
Yeah,
Even if the only thing that they come up with, which it won't be, but even if the only thing they came away from it was thinking about, particularly in terms of behaviors and punishments, actually, we don't know enough to be able to punish someone. We don't understand their context well enough to be able to say that this is worthy of a punishment. And that in itself, that tiny part is a huge thing. So the fact that you've managed to give that to so many different teachers is huge.
It was, I mean, honestly, it was very impactful. And I was just like very humbled to be able to do that kind of thing, because that's what I've always wanted to do. We're doing all of this work. It was exhausting as parents, having to I mean, this, everybody looking at this knows how exhausting it is, trying to just maintain some sort of okayness, right? Like, but then when you have a team that is so good and you see the possibilities for how cohesive a team can be, how collaborative a team can be, even when there are a lot of challenges, I was very appreciative to be able to do that training. Yeah. And I mean, like this year, we haven't had any of those kind of issues, because just like you were saying in the beginning, once, he's growing up, that's one thing. Another thing is he's got this team and he knows it from last year. Like he tested the limits, and like, he knows that they're there for him no matter what. Like that's unconditional. Like, we're going to support you, even if you have to go home today to keep everybody safe. You know what I mean? Like, it's that kind of like problem solving, and just every day is a new day. We're not going to hold yesterday against you type of thing. We talked about all of that stuff, Kieran. It was amazing. It was amazing. It's so true.
That's huge. It's. Can you imagine if they did that for every child?
And I mean, even if they do a little bit more for every child, you know what I mean? Even if it's just. Oh, thank you, Cass. Look, I just took over your interview. Okay.
Cass. It's fine. I'd rather think about you than me anyway.
This is how it happens sometimes. Okay. Thank you, Cass, for refocusing us.
Not like we're in a rush.
Right.
Well, I'm not anyway.
So, if you could tell us one thing you want to take away from your book, what would it be?
I'm just skipping to the very last chapter because the very last chapter is called Towards a Better Future. So we start. I'll read the thing at the start, and I'll try not to cry. So there are two quotes. Well, there's a dedication. There's a quote at the beginning of the book. So the quote is from a science fiction novel called A Psalm for the Wild Built, which is by Becky Chambers. And it's, we don't have to fall into the same category to be of equal value. And then the dedication is to the members of the autistic community who are no longer with us, and to a better future for those that remain and for those still to come. That last chapter, that's where that last chapter takes us in terms of life outcomes across every domain of human existence are pretty much in the shit for autistic people. Every domain of human experience you can think of, we sit at the very peak of awful experiences. And that's intersectionally across the board. Every single autistic person falls into 1, 2, 3, 20, 40, 100 of these categories, however many categories there are, across things like suicide, employment, health, access to education, access to
Homicide.
welfare, access to social care, communication, like every fundamental human right that shouldn't even be a right, it should just exist, we fall into the worst categories for. So that's what needs to change. That's what we need to do. And if that means that one person has a better experience, then that's amazing. But if 2 people can have a better experience, if 3 people, we're not talking about, making everything perfect for everybody, because life isn't perfect for anybody. But if we can just improve those experiences a little bit more, just a little bit, just a tiny fraction, that could make the world a difference between 10,000 autistic people being alive or dead. That could be the difference between those 2 things. And that's really kind of the takeaway that we wanted from this, in that this book is about masking, but this book is really about human experience. And if there are a group of humans that are having a really, really shit experience, then it's everybody else's responsibility to actually look at that and say, no, that's not good
And that's
enough.
called community, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So while the book was kind of predominantly written in the direction of academics, of researchers and things, that was kind of where it
We
kind of
need
started.
that. It's
Yeah.
really important. Yeah, we need that.
But we've tried to make it as accessible as possible. There's a huge, great big glossary in the back. Everything's referenced and things, and we've tried to write it in a way so that it's accessible to anybody. But if we had to not level it down, that's not quite the right phrase, but if we took our attention off of academics and said, who else is it for, then professionals are key to this as well, but also parents. But professionals sit there as well. It's accessible to professionals. If you want to learn, you can sit and study that book. There is no excuse for you not to be able to do so.
And you can go back
Especially
and
when the audio
reference
book comes
it.
out.
Yeah, and reference that. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so there is no excuse for anybody who is working with autistic people for them not to want autistic people to have a better experience. And that doesn't necessarily mean sticking everybody in the same category. That means different people have different needs, will want different outcomes, will look for different things in life. And that's all okay. It's our job is to facilitate whatever it is that they want that keeps them healthy and happy. That's it. That's all our role is. As parents, as professionals, that's what our job is, to help people to access life in the way that they need to, as long as that doesn't negatively impact on other people. That's it. So keeping it simple and keeping it like that. Actually, are we doing those things? No, we're not. We're thinking about what we want for people, what systems tell us that people should be doing. And actually, we're not. That's dehumanizing it. We're not looking at a whole human experience or seeing the human being in any of this. So yeah, so that was probably a very long answer to your question, Cass, but that's it. How do we make life better for people, and what are we going to do about that? Because at the minute we're not really doing enough.
Well, I love that, Kieran. Right. Well, okay. So on that note,
Oh no.
so we are going to stop this, but before we go, I do want to tell you that we have 2 more book club meetings coming up. One is with Kayla Allen Omeza, who just wrote, it's either Black and Autistic or Autistic and Black. I can't remember which one is it?
Autistic and Black.
Autistic and Black. Just wrote that book that just came out. So, and she also wrote Afro-Autistic and had another book come out in the meantime, and I can't even put my mind on what that is called. But so we're gonna have her maybe like next week, and then we have another one the next week with hold on. Names are so bad. I am like so bad with remembering names, but I think it's Shelley Coleman, and her book was something. We're gonna, but it's good. It's something like
Put it on your Facebook page. Go check your Facebook page.
everything no one told me about raising a disabled child. I'm gonna say it the wrong way, but something like that. And it seems very good. It talks about like going through paperwork and like all of the things that you have to do, and helping parents navigate systems. So that's a really helpful book. So yeah, we have that coming up. What did you say, Kieran?
just said it's on your Facebook page, so you should really go and look at it.
Yeah. In the group, please do go and look at those. They're coming up very soon. We're getting back.
Caroline, put it in the comments.
Huh? Yes, Caroline. Look. Wow. Hello. Thank you, Caroline. I appreciate you. Yeah, so come and hang out for those sessions. Those will be awesome. And I will also be keynoting, not with Christy Forbes, but in a different keynote than Christy Forbes at the Lives in the Balance Summit coming up in April. Guess what guess what my title is?
Go on.
Jules and I are doing it together. The disconnect between the neurodivergent community and the school systems. In 50 minutes or less.
Well, we've just done that in an hour and 40 minutes. So.
In 50 minutes or less, we're going to be talking about that. And yeah, so that'll be fun. It'll be a good session. I'm looking forward to it. And I'm also doing a breakout session with Tiffany from Nigh Functioning Autism about inclusion for non-speaking students in the school system. So that's going to be so fun. Yeah.
So many good things.
Do you have anything coming up, Kieran, you'd like to tell everybody about?
What have I got coming up? I'm doing
it's
so
hard
much
to
training.
Think of these things, right?
I'm doing so much training at the moment. It's like because I'm either at home or I'm in Belfast or I'm in London at the moment. One thing that is coming up actually, Awesome Ireland are putting on. It's an in-person conference, but it's a hybrid conference. I'll drop you the link if you want to share it.
Yeah, I do.
So that's been held in Dublin in, I want to say May. I might be wrong.
Where's Dublin?
Where's Dublin? That's in the Republic of Ireland.
Is that in the UK?
No, not Great Britain, not England.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
That's fine. That's not in the UK.
Not in the UK, okay. But Great Britain, it's in Great Britain.
No, it's not.
Darn, I thought Ireland was one. Okay, all right. I'll go study the Venn diagram again.
It's in the British Isles.
Okay. It's very confusing. All right, but thank you all. We love you for coming and hanging with us. You stay on. Look, Caroline knows the struggle.
I sent you that picture the other day, didn't I?
That was even worse than the other one you sent me. And I feel like it keeps changing. I think you're trying to trick me.
Yeah, that's Brexit. That's what caused that.
Ah, okay. All right. Well, thank y'all. And I'm so happy that y'all came to join us for this whole entire conversation. Kieran, you stay, and I'm going to end the stream. Bye, everyone.
Bye.